right, so it's August 2019. I'm playing musical theater gigs, did this Great America thing. So starting to play with a lot of different musicians and music styles that I previously hadn't done before. So starting to expand my horizons, open my mind to things that I wasn't really open-minded to in the past. And one such thing is a cover band. So back in my day, we used to make fun of cover bands because, they can't make their own music. But, I'm older. I'm just like, hey, it'd be fun to play some of these songs that I grew up listening to and I love so much. So I thought, what the hell? I joined a cover band and we were doing rehearsal. These people I've never played with before, so I didn't really know what to expect. And so, I'm playing my regular acoustic drums. At this point, I still really wasn't into electric drums. Although the main guy asked if I had an electric kit. I'm like, no. Who would play that? It's for kids, is what I was thinking. But anyway, so the keyboard player, she's up there doing her thing, and I noticed she has a little sample pad. And I've seen this in like videos for like modern music where there's a little pad and it's got, you're playing your drums with your fingers. So little drum pads and it makes drum sounds. So anyway, so it can hold samples also. So like sound effects and oohs and ahs and, stuff that typically you hear in modern music, that is artificial, but everybody's become so accustomed to hearing it, you kind of have to make these sounds now. And they have to sound like, I'm in a cover band, and so these sounds have to be like the original record or close to it, So she's got this sample pad, and, I'd never seen one before in real life. And she said to me, well, hey, I've got these hand claps and some other stuff that it's hard for me to do while I'm playing keyboards. Can you help me out? And I'm like, well, as a matter of fact, I do have this one thing. So enter the Alesis ControlPad. So a friend of mine in the early 2000s gave this to me. And at the time, I'm just like, what? I was all acoustic drums. And I had actually taken MIDI class, recording technology class in college. So I kind of had a basic understanding of MIDI, used an Alesis SR16 drum machine, which was a classic. So this was released around the same time. I'm not totally sure, but early 2000s. If you look in the documentation, there's mention of Windows XP, which came out in 2001. So this was after that. And, it sat in my car for like years. And then finally I took it out of my car and it sat in my garage for years and moved. I've moved several times and it moved with me every time. And finally, 15, 20 years later, I'm like, I'm going to try to use this thing. Here's the perfect opportunity. So this is a MIDI controller, and it's got 8 pads. You hit these pads with sticks. Why it's in a funky, like instead of a grid, it's got like this artistic line, I don't know. But it's basically, it's Alesis's answer to the Roland Octapad, which came out quite a bit earlier, like 85, 86. But this is basically the same thing. It doesn't make any actual sounds itself other than the sound of wood hitting rubber. But it's called a MIDI controller, and so that means it doesn't have any sounds built in. So in the electronic world, you have something called a sound generator, which generates sounds. And the MIDI, which is musical instrument digital interface, is just a language for digital instruments to communicate with each other. So it's like if you say, yeah, I know English, but you have a sore throat and you can't speak, you still know English, you can write things down, so you know the language, but your voice box is the sound generator, and you can't generate sound, but you can still communicate with others. You can tell your friend, write on a piece of paper, please say I love you to my wife or something. And then that friend has a sound generator and can tell your wife that you love her. So that's an analogy or simile, I don't know. But that's basically what this is. This is a controller. It doesn't have a sound generator. So you have to provide another sound generator. This will send the message to that sound generator that when you hit this pad, you want a specific sound to be played. When you hit this pad, you want another specific sound to be played. So that's what this is. And I thought, well, okay, this lady playing the keyboards has a sample pad, which is a sound generator. So you plug it into a speaker and you push the pad and it generates these sounds. And it also has a MIDI input. So this has MIDI out and MIDI in, you know, the traditional 5-pin old school MIDI. And so I thought, well, let's make it work. So I brought it to rehearsal one day, set it up, and you know, my knowledge of MIDI, you know, had been fading. You know, that was 20 plus years ago that I took that class, but I still had the principles. So it's just a matter of actually going into manuals and figuring out specifically how to configure, how to set up everything. And I think that's why a lot of people kind of shy away from MIDI as it was originally intended, because it's technical and you do have to read manuals, and nobody does that anymore except for me, apparently. So that's the thing about MIDI. If you don't really understand it and you buy this thing, you know, you take it home, you turn it on and you hit it and you expect it to make a sound and it doesn't. And oh, you think, oh, I need an amp, and you look on the back and there's like no headphone jack, there's no output of any sort, and you're just like, what? What is the purpose of this? You know, and it becomes a place to put your coffee, you know, and you just expensive table. But if you do know MIDI, you can do quite a bit with this thing. So one of the benefits to this is you would have one source, one sound generator for all of your samples. So in our case, there's me, the drummer, and the keyboard player. We would share that one sample unit. And so you plug just one device into your PA, and so the volumes are going to be consistent. So whether she plays the hand clap or I play the hand clap, it'll be the same. And at least the same sound. Now there's something called velocity, which is another story, but at least the samples will always be the same. We don't have to worry about keeping the sample library in sync between multiple devices. So everything's in one place, and so you've got some consistency there. And it, you know, less money, fewer sound generators is less cost. It was a new band. I didn't want to spend too much money. I had this thing, so perfect. So let me demo what I set up, and it worked. It actually worked great. During rehearsals, I ended up quitting this band before our first gig, which is another story. But it did work, so I had the proof of concept, and let me demo that for you now. All right, so what happened is the keyboard player gave me the MIDI note numbers from her sampler. So for MIDI, you need a note number, but also the channel number. Sometimes a program change message, but in this case, we didn't. We just needed a channel number and a note number to assign to each pad. So she didn't know the channel number, so I had to go through the sampler's documentation, and it turned out to be channel 10. And that is the typical channel that is used for percussion. So had I known that at the time, I could have guessed, but you know, I was still rusty with all of my MIDI stuff. All right, so let's turn it on. Now, one thing is this also has the concept of kits. So you save the settings for all 8 pads into a kit. And then if you're in a middle of a performance, you can change kits between songs and they will have different sounds if you want. You don't have to. So this is a selector LED, so it's selected to kit, and then up and down I want to go to a high number of kits because I think I have some stuff programmed on this. So I'm going to say kit number 8. I just chose a random kit number, assuming that I don't have anything on here that I wanted to keep. I've forgotten. So I'm choosing random kit number 8. Now, in order to change the first pad, all you do is you hit it. So you get a stick and you hit it. And if you go to here, it will tell you the channel number of the pad that you hit. Alright, so the MIDI channel number for this pad is 1, and it looks like it's going to be 1 for all of them, but you can't take that for granted, or you can't make that assumption. So for each one, you hit it first, set the channel number, and then the note number. So in this case, I'm going to set this to 40 because that's the sound of the applause sample. So it turns out on her sampler is also 8 pads. So I'm going to arrange my 8 to match her 8 just so we can, if we needed to communicate with each other, we could do that. All right, so the first one is channel number changing it, but channel number 10, note number 40, and that's what we want. So now we want to change the next one, so we hit the next one, and you see it tells you what is set for the MIDI channel number. So I'm going to change that to 10. And I think it's easiest if we change all the channel numbers first. So let's do that. I don't think there's a way to set them all at once. That would be way too easy. But, that could cause massive problems too. If you could change them all at once and you made a mistake, you wouldn't be too happy. All right, so now we're at the note number. So here we should have 40. Now here we haven't set this one yet, so it's whatever it was before we got here. I'm going to set it to 41. This is off the sampler. So on the sampler, you can choose any note number you want. You just have to make them match. So that's how they kind of line up. So think of them as lanes, This one's in lane 41, and it matches up with what's in lane 41 on that sampler. All right, and this one was 42. This one, 43. And I think it's just kind of lucky that they're all kind of sequential. But here, this one was 36, which I think is a common number for a bass drum. But in our case, it's going to map to a yeah sample. Okay, this one is 37. $38. And this one is going to be a loop. Try that out. All right, so let's double check. This should be 40, 41, 42, 43, 36, 37, 38, 39. All right, so on this control pad, there's no save button. So whatever you set, it's saved. So you have to be careful. I mean, that's kind of convenient, but in a way, it's easy to make mistakes. So if you're playing along and somebody comes and pushes one of these buttons, they've instantly changed your kit. So don't let anybody near this, and certainly Make sure that when you do change functions, you're on the right one. I've done that before too, where I thought I was changing, sensitivity or threshold, but I was actually changing the MIDI channel number, and that screwed everything up. So be careful when making these changes, and let's double check that everything is on channel 10. Because if these aren't set, if these numbers are not right, you will get unpredictable results. Okay, so it's all set up. It's actually very simple to set this up. You just have to be very diligent, very careful. If there's a lot of people around, tell them to shut the hell up while you do this. It'll only take a couple of minutes, but you got to do it right. All right, now some of these other functions like sensitivity, velocity curve, and threshold, I'm not going to really go into, but I'm just going to demo that it does work. You can control a sampler using the control pad. All right, so let's give it a try. Okay, so here we are at the rehearsal. So I've set up my drums, pretend these are my drums. I have my control pad over here, and it's just sitting on a crate. They do sell stands for them, but at this point I didn't invest in it just because I wanted to make sure this is going to work. I have the MIDI cable. Now this is like a 20-foot MIDI cable. Here we're set up, side by side, but in actuality at our rehearsal space, she was quite a bit further away. So I just got a longer cable. So we turn the control pad on. Now, if you recall, all of our settings were on kit 8. When I turn this on, it defaults to kit 0. So, be sure to remember which kit you had set up. And I'm going to just double check and make sure that we're still on channel 10. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Yeah, so it kept everything, which is the good news. Let's check the note numbers. 40, 41, 42, 43, 36, 37, 38, 39. Okay, so everything's good, but it did default to kit 0 when you turned it on and then turned it off and then on. So I just had to switch it to kit 8. Make sure to write that down. If you forget it, then and you play it at kit 0, who knows what's going to come out of that thing, if anything. All right, so we get our cable. I plug, the cable, doesn't matter which end of the cable you use, but it does matter that you go to the MIDI out because we're sending our signal out. And then I give this to our friendly keyboard player and I let her deal with her own equipment. But if I'm her, I've already plugged this in. This is the MIDI in. So I just made it with the MIDI on the MIDI in. All right. So some people get confused about MIDI out and in. I don't really know why. I'm sending the signal from here into that. So out of this and into that seems pretty straightforward to me. So now I've already plugged it into the amplifier and everything should be good. I should have, let's see, applause, I believe, here. And I forget what this one is. Hand clap. Oh, that's a rim shot. And this is the snare drum. Here, I've forgotten. Oh, yeah. So that's the sound effects. I'm going, yeah. And here I've got these pluck things like. So you saw one of them didn't trigger, and that's due to the sensitivity. So I have it set where I have to hit it kind of hard. If you have it set really low, you might accidentally trigger something. So you have to set it to whatever works for you. And then here I have set a loop. So let's see if this works. I don't know. So on the sampler, it's going to loop a beat, and it's supposed to keep playing it. I hit it once, it plays the loop until I hit it again, it should stop. So let's see if that works. So cool, it stopped. Yeah, so this is it. So imagine trying to play all of this on your pads with your fingers. I mean, you could do it, but let's say you wanted to do some faster stuff. Oh, that's surprise. So yeah, trying to do that with my fingers is going to be hard. Oh, maybe it's not that hard. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so yeah, it's not as hard as I thought it would be to do faster taps on this. But let's say I'm playing keyboard at the same time, which was the case here, trying to do like, you know, that's hard. So it's a lot easier for a drummer. But the other point is, like I said earlier, I have the same exact samples here and here. So the same exact sounds are available to two different musicians. So we can coordinate with each other and arrange it so we get everything that we need. So yeah, cool. There you go. Alesis ControlPad MIDI controller. Cool.